Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz drummer, composer, and educator Holly Channell. We caught up with her to talk about her new 2024 CD called Not Just a Standard, Giving Birth in COVID and a Good Life in Jazz so far. She chose to do her debut album with arranged jazz standards because that's how she learned to play and appreciates the music. Based in Boston, she plays everything from straight jazz to pop and rock. Recently off a tour celebrating the award-winning lyricist Dorothy Fields, she is always busy and evolving. Dig this story.
So you got the coffee and the tornado sirens going. So we scream the shade.
Yep, that's perfect.
It's a perfect improv backdrop to jazz.
Totally.
So it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute. Where are you located?
I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston, excellent. Well, I'm in Kansas City. It's great to meet you. And before we get into your latest album, I would like to know, 4 years ago, this pandemic did quite a turn on all of us, and there was a lot of uncertainty. How did you make it through the pandemic, and how did it change you? Oh,
man. Well, during the pandemic, I was pregnant. And I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I had her March 22nd, 2020.
Wow.
So, right when everything was shutting down. And I had just graduated with my bachelor's. I was 8 months pregnant, and I was auditioning for graduate schools. And then everything shut down, and I had my daughter, and the doctors weren't even at the hospital, and it was this, whole charade. So I think I got lucky where, birthing experience during the pandemic was honestly awful, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I really wouldn't. But I got lucky because she was a great distraction. And so it was me and my husband were hunkered down. We were hunkered down and quarantined with our newborn. And that's kind of how we got through it. And, that's it. That's how we did it.
That's the ultimate double-edged sword right there. So I'm curious, not just the standard, was it influenced by the pandemic? Talk to me about the artistic forces that went into this album.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, so the album came about because, I was a graduate student for jazz performance at Arizona State University. And so I had auditioned for that right before, the shutdown. And I got the call saying that I got in, and then I had Gracie, and kind of deciding what the heck I should do. So I ended up going a year later. So I waited a year, and then I went to graduate school at Arizona State. And the pandemic didn't totally, it influenced the album in the ways it brought me to Arizona State when it did, because the people who are on the album are directly correlated with Arizona State University. So I had finished up my master's degree, and as I was finishing it up, so during that process, I created a great mentorship with Jason Palmer, who's a trumpet player, and he would fly in a few times a semester as an artist in residence at Arizona. And we started playing together and just playing duo and all these things. And I was like, hey, would you want to play on my album? Because I was planning to record an album anyway. And he's like, heck yeah. And he was totally down. And so what we would do is we'd have duo sessions, and some of the arrangements on the album came about as we were just fooling around in our duo playing sessions. And then I had Mike Coker, he's the pianist on the album, he's the director of jazz studies at Arizona State. And him and I would play duo a lot as well. And so I was like, okay, I want to make a record with Mike, and I want to make a record with Jason. And then Ben Hedquist is, he's the bassist on the album, and he was the bass professor at Arizona State at the time. Now he's the head of the pop and music department at Gilbert Chandler Community College. But so we were all playing with each other separately and not together, and then I brought everybody together for this record. But it wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, because if there wasn't a pandemic, I would have went to Arizona State a year earlier. And I think none of the paths would have crossed like they did.
Yeah,
so,
that's
yeah, so it's interesting, the turn of events and how everything went down. Yeah.
Yeah, serendipity. I remember interviewing Jason Palmer right as the pandemic began. He had a lush new album that came out. He's a great cat. So
he's an amazing human being and an amazing player, and he makes this album what it is. Like, it wouldn't be at all what it is without him on it and his sound and his energy. Yeah.
So with that being said, what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
So I'm hoping that, so with the album title as Not Just a Standard, there's two meanings behind it. The first is that, you know, I'm an up-and-coming drummer. Now I have 2 master's degrees. I just finished at the Berklee Global Jazz Institute, working with Danilo Perez. And so I just finished, and now I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to just take my career in full swing. It's like no one knows who I am. So the title of the album is Not Just a Standard, because I'm not just the standard drummer. I'm Holly Channell. So that's kind of the first meaning behind it. The second meaning behind it is the importance of the jazz standard. I think what's happening is the tradition of the music is kind of, people aren't realizing the depth and the history of Black American music, and people are just trying to reinvent it, especially the younger crowd. And I remember not really thinking that way until when I was at Arizona State, I studied with drummer Louis Nash for 2 years, and he was just adamant about keeping the tradition alive. And it really got ingrained in me, the importance of that. And that's how I fell in love with the music, was listening to jazz standards and trying to translate what Alvin Jones, you know, and Philly Joe were doing on the drums on those jazz standards to me, so that I could put my own voice on it. And so Not Just a Standard is about keeping the tradition alive, but being open to innovation. So I have every standard that's on there. I mean, you have things from Gershwin to Jovim, and to Benny Golson. And each standard is arranged a little bit differently, from, you know, putting it in an odd meter or changing the intro, just little things, but still keeping the tradition and where this music came from. I think that's really, really, really important.
So tell me how this journey into the music and jazz and the drums, how did the start begin and take off for you?
Yeah, so like many stories with young drummers, you know, I was one of the 8-year-olds who were taking out the pots and pans and the stuff and playing on them in the living room and breaking mixing spoons. And after a lot of time doing that, my parents realized like it wasn't a phase. And so by the time I was 10, they got me a really cheap beginner drum set. And I started playing. I started teaching myself. I was introduced to drums in a rock fashion. So my uncle, my late uncle, who just passed away last year, he's the one who showed me the drums. He, you know, he was a metal drummer, and he would take me to his band practice rooms in Worcester, Massachusetts, and we would just play. He would have me on his kit, and he would be on the guitar, and then we would switch, and he introduced me to the punk rock world, and that's where I started in this music. And it completely took a 180, because now I dedicate my life to, you know, the jazz tradition and to global jazz. But my influences started there. And so over time, you know, by the time I was like, I would say from 10 to 23, I was a rock drummer. And then at 23, for the first time, I was introduced to the world of jazz through a jazz history class in the middle of nowhere in Idaho by Dr. Ryan Nielsen, and my life completely changed. And I decided to switch it over, and so for 6 years now, I've been on the Black American music stretch, and I think you can hear that in my playing. I think people are telling me, like, my fills sometimes, they sound rock-esque. They sound like they're not, I'm not fully a jazz drummer, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away?
My first live jazz, my first live jazz show, was in Chicago, the Gordon Goodwin Big Fat Band. I think I was like maybe 11 or 12, and I remember seeing the drummer, and the Gordon Goodwin Big Fat Band definitely does do jazz, but they're heavier, and with a lot of stuff, and I remember being like, whoa. And so I think that was the introduction of like, okay, like look at what the drums can do. And then it wasn't until from then on, it wasn't until years later when I was maybe 19 or 20, and I saw Colby Watkins. He's a drummer who was playing in Idaho. I saw him play, and it was like his touch, his feel, his groove. I mean, it was unreal. It was like, how do I play like that? And that was probably my second real live jazz show. It was the Colby Watkins Group Text. And for people who don't know who Colby Watkins is, he plays with Bobby Broom now. He's in North Carolina. I studied with him through my undergrad, and he was the longest-standing drummer for Sonny Rollins. And he just had this amazing touch. And I was like, that's it. That's it for drumming for me. And, yeah, those were the two, I think, first prominent live jazz shows that I think had a really big impact on my life.
So what do you like the best about being a professional drummer? What is it that motivates you and gets you up every day? What do you love the best about it?
I love the creativity and in being able to tell my stories on the instrument. I think it's interesting because I was talking with Terry Lynn Carrington, and I had a coffee the other day, and I was just, she was like, well, what do you want? What do you want to do? And I was like, I can't envision a life without telling my stories, educating, and performing, and which is composition, teaching, and performing. And I think those are the three things that get me going. They kind of light my fire, is teaching the experiences that I've had, and composing and creating my own stories, and then sharing my stories through the drums. Those are my three favorite things about being in this profession. And there are three things I'll do for the rest of my life. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about like experiences like on the bandstand. Now that you're doing this and you're on stages, was there a stage you dreamed about playing on that you finally have had the chance to do it and you're like, wow, I'm here?
I would say yes. I'm trying to think of like the stages that I've played on. So there were two, and they happened this last year. In January, I got to headline, or at least I got to sideline and headline. I did two different shows at the Panama Jazz Festival. And one of them was, I worked with Marion Hayden, who's a Detroit bassist. And then the other one was with the Global Jazz Ambassadors. And it was this huge stage. We played for 30,000 people. And it was so unreal as a jazz drummer to play for 30,000 people. That's not common. And I remember, doing these two shows, and the people of Panama are incredible, and they're loving, and they just want to experience music and life, and they were unreal experiences. It's like, am I really doing this right now? I mean, it really was crazy to have those experiences. And then the other one was in February, almost a month later. I got to play a show at the BPC, which is the Berkeley Performance Center, for a Thursday night showcase for the 15th anniversary summit of the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute. And I got to play on stage with Danilo Perez, John Patitucci, and I did a drum duo concert with Brian Blake. And wow. It was crazy. I mean, that will be the highlight of my life for the rest of my life, or at least one of the highlights. I mean, I had a kid, she's great. But like musically, like, I mean, even just rehearsing with Brian, and I remember being in my undergrad, and I was getting ready to graduate, and I was looking where I was going to study next, and I was trying, Brian Blade was I was trying to emulate his sound since I started, you know, playing jazz music and trying to figure this all out, and it was his sound with the Chick Corea Trio, and the Trilogy albums, and I'm like, how does he play like that? What does he do? And I remember looking up, finding out where he was teaching, and I looked everywhere, and he didn't teach anywhere because he doesn't teach. And it just so happens that, you know, this year I was in the right place at the right time working with Danilo Perez, and, you know, I got the call to play a drum duo concert with Brian Blade and John Patitucci and Danilo. And to be able to work with Brian, talk with him, rehearse with him, and then play with him. And then, of course, John Patitucci, like, his playing's unreal. And then, of course, Danilo. You know, it was just crazy. And it was like, it was another moment, like, am I doing this right now? Like, am I really playing drums at the same time as Brian Blade right now on the stage? What is happening? And it was so unreal, and I'm so happy I have pictures and I have videos of the concert, and I'll cherish it forever. And it's a stepping stone of like, okay, if I did this, then what else can I do? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you love this music that we call jazz?
For me, that's a pretty deep question, because, you know, when I got introduced to jazz for real, the first ever jazz album I ever owned was Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. I got it in the mail, the CD, back in like 2007, and I was part of this like CD subscription thing, and they would send me a CD a month. And sometimes it was Fall Out Boy, sometimes it was Foo Fighters. And it just turned out that one of the months was Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, which is completely different than, you know, Foo Fighters and the Fall Out Boy. And I remember listening to it, and I'm like, what is this? And I remember, you know, that was like when I was 10 or 11, and I was like playing along. I'm like, this is easy, because like, what do I know? And then it wasn't until years later, you know, I'm 23, I'm in this jazz history class, and Dr. Nielsen is not shying away from what this music is really about and where it really came from in the history of the United States, and how it really came about with the civil rights movement, with slavery, with all of these things that are going on, and how this music was a way for Black Americans to express themselves at a time where you couldn't express yourself. And I just remember feeling it so heavily, and feeling the deep spiritual tradition, this ritual, which is really what it is. When you're getting on the bandstand and you're playing with everybody, it's a completely selfless music. You have to be listening to everybody at all times. It's this beautiful ritual, and how I just was like, this is so deep. This is bigger than myself. And I wanted to be a part of it, and my whole soul latched on to the fact that this music is bigger than myself. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I play. One, I connect with it, I love it, it's fun, but also I know the reverence of the people who came before me, who sat in the drum seat before me, and so what I have to honor, you know, as I play and innovate, and as I respect the tradition. So that's why I play this music. It's those deep, the real deep meanings behind why this music was created in the first place. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm here talking to you. Kind of Blue is my baptismal, so I get it. Mm-hmm. It was groundbreaking. And I remember, speaking of surreal moments, I remember interviewing Jimmy Cobb about it and just being like, I can't believe how grounded this guy is. And he just said, I will never forget, he just said, yeah, man, we just went to the studio and we just played our buns off. That was his summary. But I will tell you this, as someone that loves that session, James Kaplan, I just interviewed him. He's an author of a book called 3 Shades of Blue, and it goes through a very detailed account of the lives of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Bill Evans, the architect of that album, and how it built jazz and how it changed in the 70s and after Ed Sullivan had the Beatles on. It's really fascinating. You should give it a read.
Wow, what's the name of that book?
It's called Three Shades of Blue by James Kaplan.
Okay, Three Shades of Blue by James Kaplan. Okay, I would love it. Yeah, that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, 100%. So let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, man. You know what? I think my title on my album says it all. I'm not just a standard. I'm not just the standard wannabe drummer out there. I'm Holly Channell. I have stories to share, and I'm worth it, and and I'm worth giving a listen to. And like I'm a creator, and I'm not just a standard. That's what I have to say.
Well said. And so the album is not just a standard. Where's the best place for people to get it or watch you live or any of the good business? Where do they go?
Yeah, I have a website called hollychannellmusic.com. That's where you can be connected to my Instagram, which is just at Holly Channell. That's where I'm probably most active. At Instagram, website, you can buy that when the album comes out. It comes out October 4th. You can buy it on my website. You'll be able to download it, stream it on all platforms. And I hope everybody gets a copy. Yeah.
I'm sure they will, and I can't wait to profile it on the show. It has been wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much, Holly, for taking a minute out. Keep doing the good work. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Boston, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Holly for her time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.